Good afternoon, I'm Stone Grissom. Well, after agreeing to temporarily reopen the government, President Trump has recently issued a warning to Congress. Now, he told them to fund his border wall through legislative means by February 15th, or he may consider using his presidential emergency powers. He says a deal without wall money simply doesn't work. Now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's open to funding for border security and perhaps some type of barrier, just not for a border wall. Joining me now to discuss this are Republican Congressman Pete King and Democratic Congressman Tom Suozzi. Appreciate your time, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Is it okay to tie the funding of the government to an issue like the border wall? I'll start with you, Congressman King.
I was against the shutdown from the start. I've been against them under Democrats.
Paychecks and can't meet their bills on a week-to-week basis. It's just not fair.
Now, I know that there's a bipartisan proposal right now, at least in the Senate side, of potentially banning government shutdowns in the future. Would each one of you support that effort?
That takes away from Congress' responsibility. To me, that's better than having a shutdown. But
You don't shut the government down.
And we're the only country that does that.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's really now we have to get to a deal.
Okay, let's talk about the potential deal. Now, right now there's a bipartisan committee working on that. Do you have faith that they'll come to an agreement?
Not necessarily. They could, but again, I don't know what the party leaders are, and there's no reason why that can't be done.
Now, do you support some type of barrier or a border wall? I mean, those are two different concepts.
I think, the whole semantics of wall is good.
Yeah, but those are different. I mean, the president said, during the campaign, he said wall. He talked about a concrete wall.
And that's because of the simplistic language has contributed to a lot of this problem.
So should we just push that aside now and just
I think that what you should do is the Democrats and the Republicans should sit down and try and negotiate a deal. Peter and I can negotiate this deal tomorrow. We've talked about this many times.
Well, we're going to negotiate it right now.
So, but unfortunately, we can't get everybody to listen to us.
So what should be in the deal then?
So I think that I don't disagree with what Peter just said. I have no problem with 12 years. The other folks, let's just make sure they're not going to be ripped apart from their families.
Okay. Do you support a path to citizenship?
Ultimately, we could. That's not going to happen now. I mean, as we become part of the fabric.
So some type of permanent residency, at least.
At least that. And if it was invited into the country.
Right. So let me ask you this. When you're talking about human beings, these are human beings. Has our rhetoric gotten too toxic? Because the president talks about, he uses words like rapists, drugs, and human trafficking. When he's talking about immigration, he's calling these people criminals when we don't necessarily treat people who do the same exact act.
What he should have said more politely would.
About 70% of their existing barriers from the 2006 Secure Walls Act.
Which was my bill, by the way.
Which was your bill, yeah. But some of that, I mean, there's a lot that goes on with that. It increased border security agents from about 12,000 to 21,000, is that correct?
I forget.
Something like that.
It's a big number, I know that.
But 70% of that wall is in places that are mainly federal lands. That's New Mexico, Arizona, California. A lot of this land is privately owned in Texas and owned by Indian tribes, Native American tribes. So how do you get past the eminent domain issue, and are you in favor of having to go in there and just taking the land from people?
First of all, the president is only talking about 150. We can work around that. The bill was then so much.
Because that's not a conservative or even Republican idea of using eminent domain to taking it away from private.
Well, it would be if it's done for a federal,
A problem with people streaming over.
But is it a problem in the areas where there's no wall? I mean, when you talk about drugs coming in, everyone says they're coming in through the ports of entry. I mean, they're coming in illegally, but they're coming in through ports of entry.
Yeah, that's why one of the main things that the Democrats.
This is the easiest deal that anyone could ever make, I think.
Okay, but when we're talking about,
he was county executive. He solved issues 20 times tougher.
Lots of them. A lot of help from Peter.
So when we're talking about some of the problems in border security, why are we not focusing on the overstays, on the visa issue, where the biggest problem is concerned? Why are we focusing on the idea of a wall? Is it because that was a campaign promise, or is it because that's really an issue?
I don't worry. Listen, President Obama built 130 miles of wall. I mean,
wage issues in the United States of America. So the middle class has been beaten down over the past 30 years.
Now, we've tried this in the past. I mean, the Gang of Eight came up with at least some type of plan. It didn't work. How far do we go? If we're now tying the funding of the government to some type of border security deal, how far of the immigration issue do we put into this deal? Do we stop at border security? Do we add reforms in asylum procedures or e-verify? Like, how far is it too far?
If I was running the show, I'd do the big deal.
You may take to reduce it somewhat.
Let's say February 15th comes around. There's no deal. The president shuts the government back down. Would you actively work to override that?
We've tried to. I would certainly believe me.
So what if he invokes national emergency powers? You support that?
Ordinarily, I wouldn't, but that's better than the government shutdown. As Obama did to grant the Dreamers the.
And he got a lot of criticism from your party.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm saying. I'm not generally a fan of it, but if it's either that or have a 5-month government shutdown, because if it happens again, I don't know when it's going to reopen.
If the president invokes the national emergency powers, what's to stop the next president? What's to stop if I'm a Democratic presidential hopeful saying, oh, guess what is also a national emergency?
I think that what we really need to
change.
focus on is something about it once and for all.
So we need some type of protection for DACA recipients, and we need some type of border barrier. Would your party be okay with like Normandy barriers or some type of moving barriers that's not necessarily a wall in this particular
whatever. Even the president is talking about barriers now. So if it comes to that, I would be.
To try and solve problems that affect all of us.
Okay. I'm assuming the border wall or border security is going to be at least, maybe not the centerpiece, but a big issue tomorrow in the State of the Union address. Do you think it should be, and do you think it'll be helpful or hurtful as far as bringing the parties together after that speech?
It depends on how he addresses it. That's really up to him.
Maybe there could be a vehicle by which to actually get a deal done.
He has publicly recently said that Nancy Pelosi was bad for America and that people are dying because of her. Is that appropriate for the president to make that?
Yeah, we're in a tough time. Nancy Pelosi has also said the wall is immoral. I mean, we can go.
We got to encourage the president to actually make a deal.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think a deal is possible?
A deal is always possible. The question is whether or not.
Okay. Let's talk about something that you both do completely agree on. The SALT deduction in the taxes. You co-sponsored a bill. What's the status of that bill? And do you think it'll give some relief to New Yorkers?
So we should just explain first what it is. You know,
it's like $10,000 calculation.
The tax bill last.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time. It's a big conversation. I could go on forever on this conversation, but I appreciate you guys coming here and taking some of the tough questions.
Thanks for having us.
All right, thank you. Congressman Pete King and Congressman Tom Suozzi.
Pete, you did a good job.
Thank you.
You're finally figuring this out.
Well, you're King Suozzi.
And I'm not even in the picture.